For decades, science has been trying to find a difference, if there is such, in between the male and the female brain, and now a group of scientists failed completely at doing so, making this question obsolete altogether. Now, this study, Margaret, came in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and a group of scientists looked into the MRI scans of 1,400 different brains, male, female, from Australia, from America, from Germany, different age groups, and what they saw is that there's not a definite answer. There's not a way to simply look at a brain and say this is a female brain and there is a male brain. What they found was that there's areas of the brain that are stereotypically female and stereotypically male. And now, that brings the question. For centuries, people say, no, men have a different brain, and that's why they think in a certain way, and women think in a certain way because they have a different brain. But this is not a biological reason. Now we know that there's no biological differentiation like the genitals, that is very easy to differentiate in one and the other, but the brain is the same. It's just a big spectrum where we do have parts of both. Everyone has.
Right. Well, when fetal tissue is developing in utero, genitalia, it comes from the same cells initially before it develops into either male or female. And I believe that's the same way with the brain, but I think you're going to go into that about how the brain doesn't necessarily take on, like genitalia does, a sex assignment.
See, what they are looking into is the fact that they found these mosaics that they can easily identify with male behaviors. And part of these factors that were explored was the risk-taking, the doing household chores, game participation, visual stimulation, and putting on makeup. Things that are stereotypical male or female, and see how the brain reacted. What they found is nobody has a purely male or a purely female. There were very little number of people that had a purely female, and it wasn't necessarily gender appropriate. They were men that have completely female brains and females that had completely male brains. So this idea that the brains are different is not necessarily a gender thing. It's more of going back to the debate of nurture versus nature.
I mean, I think that to a point, okay, so brains don't have a sex assignment, but at the same time, like, I know you have kids, but if you've ever been around like a little boy, I was around a little boy recently, and he was making like a motor sound, pushing a truck on the floor. I mean, nobody enforced a gender role. I think, he was this tiny little person, just sort of being who he is. So I think that we are a chemical response. We're one gigantic chemical response. We're made up of an endocrine system that tells our brain, gives us a chemical reaction. And I think that plays a large part of male and female, but at the same time, no question, gender roles are stereotypically still in full force as far as I'm concerned. So there is some truth, I think, to this study.
Yeah, the study really, for me, what it shows is that this idea that men and women behave and think differently does not necessarily come from a biological standpoint where you can look at the organ and say, oh, obvious, that's why we think differently. I think this is more of a society-imposed gender assignment that we kind of develop and evolve. Also, now, historically, men had different roles than women, and that also helped for the development of the brain thinking in different ways, but more of a consciousness social level than it is a biological thing that your brain predisposes you because you're male or female. But now we know that scientists are looking right into the brain to see if there's a real difference in between the male and the female brain, and they have found that there is not, and it's the same brain, we just learn in different ways.